Hi, Jen.
Hi, Bethany.
How are you today?
Good.
I already feel your intense energy for what our topic is going to be about today.
Yeah.
You're getting me all. I'm getting all riled up too now.
I'm ready to fight.
You are. I won't be there behind you.
I'm super excited.
Yeah.
Today we're talking about the stigma surrounding C-sections because we're starting to get interviewed and have some sort of interaction with other people in this space, which has been amazing because there's so many people doing so many wonderful things.
Totally.
But of course, when people want to speak to us, one of the questions that they always ask is how we feel about the stigma around C-sections, why we think it exists, and what we think we can do to kind of change that narrative. And I think, just starting this podcast, that was one of the things we said. Why do we want to do this? To reduce the stigma and shame around C-sections.
Yeah.
But I don't think I've put so much thought into it as I have recently. So I thought this was a great time to really dig into this topic because it's so important.
So important.
It's
it
really
hurts moms.
It does. It hurts moms. That is the
And that's
theme
not fair.
of today. That we are really acknowledging that this is not okay. It's something that really affects how people are processing their births, how they're recovering. And if there's anything we can do about it, we want to try. I thought it would be nice to talk about one thing I love about us. There's many things. Is that we come from two very different perspectives. And somehow we have merged in a way where we obviously feel very similarly about a lot of things, but we come from very different places. So I thought we would start by telling our stories of how we got to where we are today.
Right. Why we are C-section advocates.
Yeah, as far as our viewpoints about things. So do you want me to start first?
You go. Yeah.
Okay. So I came from a perspective of thinking about birth in a 100% medical way.
Of course.
I had no other feelings about it. This was a medical event to me. I had no problem with that, right? I saw and dealt with all the complications that I knew could happen from birth, whether it's a C-section or any other type of birth experience.
Yeah.
And I had no crunch.
You had no crunch. You had no crystals in your life.
I had no crunch.
Succulent garden.
No crystals. And I was sort of proud of that. And I was I'm trying to be really honest because I feel like it's
honest. I'm going to be honest too.
Yeah, it's not helpful unless we're really honest. And anyone who talked about birth as this very natural process, I was like, you are wrong. You don't know anything. What I see is really scary stuff. I see the complications. I just felt like those people were kind of ignorant. I just didn't see that side of it at all.
Well, you also saw vaginal and C-sections. And did you really kind of separate the two as like, these are two completely different births? Or to you, it was just like you were helping manage pain in either scenario?
I saw them as patients in the hospital, to be totally honest with you. And yeah, first of all, I don't think there was, and now we're going back. So this is before I ever got pregnant, before I ever had a child. So let's say my feelings 10 years ago. I don't think there was as much going on the internet.
No,
probably.
Definitely not.
Back then. And I certainly wasn't seeking it out.
No.
So I wouldn't know, I guess, if there was.
Is Instagram around?
I think so.
How old is Instagram?
I don't know.
But that has been a platform that has just exploded people's thinking that they can just say whatever they want and not think about the price it pays on who's looking at that information.
Yeah, the rise of medical misinformation that hadn't quite happened yet. And when it did, that just made me more angry because I got obviously.
What made you more angry, Jen?
Obviously, but it was upsetting if I saw anything that I felt like wasn't truly representative of what I knew, but I also didn't understand that there is a side of things that I didn't really
like the emotional support.
Really understand either. But when I was pregnant with Pippa, well, first of all, I was talking to you about this weekend, how
I know someone
I might be a little psychic.
Yeah.
Because I went to my daughter's elementary school fundraiser and there were like tarot card readers.
They were?
Yes.
Why didn't you tell me about this?
So psychic, whatever. She did my reading, and as we're talking, and she's sort of asking me a little bit about my life and trying to understand what she was seeing.
What cards did she present to you?
I don't know. She was trying to spin it positive, but I'm not entirely sure that they were all positive.
Oh, no.
But she looked at me and she said, but you know you're psychic, right?
Did you tell me this?
I did. And I said, honestly, I've never once considered that as a possibility. But when I look back, maybe I am.
Maybe you are because you thought you'd have a C-section.
Well, I mean, I don't think I ever thought about it enough, but I was sort of I was like, of course.
You're accepting of it.
It just made sense. I said, yeah, of course I'm going to have a C-section. And it truly, truly did not bother me at all. I did not feel any shame in telling people if they said, how's your pregnancy going? And at the time when I found out that Pippa was breech, I said, she's breech, I'm having a C-section.
Period.
I just never crossed my mind that anyone would judge that in any way. I really didn't. And same with, I've talked about the VBAC, but how I also felt like I knew I would have a VBAC with another child that did not even exist yet. But I felt so sure about it. So I don't know. I didn't have any sense for that stigma. Now
mine is completely different, which
yours is completely different.
Unique. Because I became a doula first. And I remember, I was in my mid-20s. Again, I wasn't thinking about when I was having children. I just knew that this was a space that I really loved, and I loved supporting women. But one of the first days, it was all about what we have to do as doulas is prevent C-sections. And that was very much intertwined in the teachings that were given.
Almost the mission.
On the mission, yeah. And so, to be honest, I left there thinking, well, I know I'm never having a C-section. And my purpose to my client is not only to provide the emotional support and, different ways we can provide movement to help mitigate your pain, but it was like the end result was you're not going to have a C-section. And I was so focused on that. And I mean, a lot of my clients, and I think you have to break it apart a little bit. Yes, if you have support throughout your whole birth, you are going to have a better chance of advocating, asking questions, having more movement. That can give you a better opportunity to birth vaginally. But I didn't see the other side of it, and I wasn't taught the other side of well, what if it's medically necessary? What if having this C-section is to decrease a mom's anxiety, or she had past sexual trauma, or they didn't talk about any of that.
Yeah. And did you ever ask yourself, why is a C-section so bad? Why are we trying so hard? Or is the general assumption that you were making was that this is what every mom would want?
Of course, I was like every mom, let's strive for the natural. If you can't make it through them, and we're doing hydrotherapy, we're doing all these things to get you to have that natural birth that you anticipated.
And define natural for me.
Unmedicated. Which the teaching that it was you're trusting your body completely. You don't need interventions.
Right. So no inductions, no epidurals.
Right.
No membrane sweep. Where do we draw the line at natural?
I mean, I think that it's so much gray area, but I didn't know enough to think about all those things, Yeah. I was still learning so much. And so I think that's where the importance of knowledge, the importance of experiences, the importance of working with clients and seeing how things shifted. Now I go back, if I was that girl again back in the room, I probably would have raised my hand and been like, what about this scenario? What about this scenario? But I didn't have the confidence to challenge it.
Yeah. And sort of the assumption is that anyone who would hire a doula would only want this version of the ideal birth, which would be the totally unmedicated, natural,
right.
Blah, blah, blah.
I mean, I guess I went into it being if I don't give them the birth, if I don't help them achieve the birth they're desiring, I'm not doing my job. I have failed them, which is also, that's not fair to doulas. And that's why I liked our discussion with Bree so much. It's meeting the client where they are.
Right.
Is so important. I wish someone had said that to me.
And that there isn't this one ideal. The ideal is supporting that woman in whatever she wants, whatever she needs in that moment. So obviously,
I had
changed
C-sections
for you. Yes.
Yes.
And there's a big thing that happened that
So
I'm sure, I know it's still, even though we've talked about it a lot, it's still hard for you to say
that my first was a
that your first
stillbirth.
was, yes.
So
I know. Sorry.
it always catches me off guard sometimes. It was so different because I was now the patient and I was now having to make decisions that I never anticipated making. And I, at that point, didn't want to have a vaginal birth because I didn't think that if I went through that process that I would ever try to become a mom again. So there was like, at that point, all of this like training and perspectives of like focusing on, sorry, I'm gonna compose myself for a second. Completely changed in a second, like literally completely changed in a second. And the doctor I was with, I had worked with her. You know, we had many situations where there were very successful births for that client's wanting of how she was delivering. So how different it was that now all of a sudden this person who I thought I was going to have, this birth that I thought I was going to achieve, completely now was different, and decisions I had to make for how I was going to birth my daughter was completely different. And then I only wanted it to be medically controlled.
Yes.
And so that's what led me into being like, I need to have a C-section. I need to know that I'm going to get to meet a live baby. And I need to feel that I am as safe as possible going into this. And I know I've said this before, but it's like I didn't trust my body. I was so scared that the outcome, if I tried to birth vaginally, I would honestly like have a complete like freak out. Yeah. And just not be able to go through that process. So for me, I then had the complete mind shift of looking at a C-section. This is a beautiful way to be able to give somebody an opportunity to birth with control versus, you know, you never know.
Yeah. I know it's so hard for you every time this gets brought up.
Yeah.
And I want to thank you for doing it, because I think it's so important. I've seen some people almost like they want to come at us with some just
negative
anger, I guess. Yeah. Towards why would you be putting so much energy and focus into talking about C-section births? And I see when you tell them why, or what your personal experience with this horrible trauma that you went through, their face changes. They don't want to
like
come at you anymore.
Right.
How can you?
Well, if you've never felt that experience, and I mean, that's why I feel like aging has been, I mean, even though like I feel like I'm still 23, but knowledgeable 23. Like I still want to have fun like I'm 23.
Forever young. We're forever young.
But I'm so grateful for all the life experiences of now being in my 40s to look back and be like, you were so naive in your 20s. You were so, you only saw everything in the tunnel that you created versus having conversations that shift your mindset.
And I think if someone can change their viewpoint in 1 second by hearing you say the one word, stillbirth.
Yeah.
How unfair is it that they had that perspective to begin with? If you can't understand that there are people who go through things, that there are so many reasons for all of our various choices or things that happen to us that are beyond our control, if you can't come in with that perspective, that's a problem.
It is a problem.
That is a problem, because you shouldn't have to say that for people to believe you that you had a valid reason, frankly.
Right. I mean, I'm like, I have to read this because it's like, this is what makes me mad when I go to Instagram, and for C-section Awareness Month, this physical therapist was like celebrating, right, C-section moms. And a lot of her clients have experienced organ prolapse, right? So they have some medical needs, and she's trying
of these moms
support these women. And this is one of the comments that came up, and her response was just so gold. But this woman writes in and says, "This is serious spreading of misinformation. Are you just suing this for attention? Countless studies show vaginal birth is better than a planned C-section in terms of health of baby and mother." Right there, that is misinformation.
Yes. And
right?
I have a story to go along with that too in a little bit.
There is absolutely no need for a low-risk pregnancy to even have a C-section. I was like, oh,
yeah.
so mad. And then she goes on to say 34% of births are now C-sections. It is already negatively impacting our evolution as a species. And one day it may be impossible to give birth naturally because babies' heads are getting bigger and women's pelvises are getting smaller. This is not a flex. C-section should almost never be allowed to be an elective procedure. Well, girl, let me tell you, I had an elective procedure to birth my babies because that was the best way for me to deliver them into this world. And I'm proud of it.
And you're not changing the evolution of our species. Don't worry.
No, I know.
You were simply making the choice that was best for you.
Like literally that never even came into my thinking until I read that. And I'm like, all this physical therapist is trying to do is celebrate the C-section moms. And that's what you took the time to then
There's a lot of anger behind this. And that's what I've realized as someone who didn't certainly participate in the stigma. I didn't recognize it. I didn't see it. But now that we've been, in a way, even on our very first episode, we said that we were announcing to people that we are starting a podcast on C-sections.
And everyone's like, why?
And everyone, people got uncomfortable and weird.
Yeah.
And so that was stigma.
So totally. My favorite line was, well, aren't you guys going to just run out of things to talk about? Yeah. How do you have enough content to just talk about something like that?
Well, they've never listened to a podcast before because there's endless for any topic you could ever imagine.
Yeah,
but
of course.
Particularly a birth and all of the nuances that come with not only a birth, but a surgery. And obviously we have plenty to talk about. But that's not the real thing that they were saying is why would you? Why would you talk about this when it is really enshrouded in shame for a lot of people? And that's exactly why when we went to look at how many resources there were available, there's so
limited.
Little compared to endless vaginal birth, whatever it is, books, I don't know,
just
apps, articles, whatever it is, there's just so much of it. One thing I wanted to do a long time ago was to write a book about.
You're still going to write a book,
this type of thing.
I'm going to be psychic for you. You're going to write a book.
And I had bought the only books. Now we're interviewing actually someone in a couple of weeks who wrote a book recently about C-sections. But before her, because this was a few years ago that I had looked, I could only find one or two. One was written by an anesthesiologist many years ago. And it was a man, and I was like, oh, okay, and I already do better. Yeah. I already, different perspective. But I found it actually a couple of days ago. It was I had purchased it because there's no online version, but it's called, I don't remember what it's called, but the subtitle is How to Prevent and Recover. It was like prevent, whatever. But the very first word is prevent.
Right. So you're already
and I had not even noticed that when I bought it a few years ago.
That's so interesting.
So it's already setting you up to say this is something that you should want to prevent. And we've had, I guess let's now go into talking about, we're sort of doing this already, but how we've personally experienced this stigma. Do you have any personal stories about, for example, when you were telling people about your births, do you feel like you ever really felt the stigma, or is it just sort of this omnipresent thing that we just all know? It's not something to brag about, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely I think I had battles with myself a little bit too.
Yeah.
To be like
your own stigma, your internal stigma.
Yeah, because I walked into the birth space with such a different perspective of it. So I did have internal battles with myself to be like, are you taking the easy way out? Should you really not give your body this opportunity? But I do think it was because, again, the birth class that I took, that I had many patients had taken this woman's birth class. And I'd always be like, why are you so ill prepared? Well, then I took her birth class and I was like, well, she didn't talk about C-sections once. I mean, to the point where my husband's like, can we please get up and just walk out of here? And I'm like, well, we can't really, because it would be kind of a bad look for me. But it drove me in a way. I was like, you just wasted 4 hours of my time, because I knew in that point I was having a C-section, and I wouldn't have felt like, oh, I'm going to ask her a question about a C-section around a dozen other couples, you know? So that in itself was like,
You didn't even want to let the other people maybe know in the birth class
that I was having a
that
C-section.
you were having a C-section.
Totally.
It's kind of sad because you are the type of person that you were seeking out birth education, which not everyone does. For example, me. I didn't, I don't know if I didn't think I needed it or didn't want it. Now I obviously, I mean, this is what I do, right? So I'm constantly seeking that out. But you were someone who came in looking for this, you know, any education that you could get to prepare yourself. And you were left basically empty-handed. They didn't even want to include it.
And it's funny, even when I think about it, like the doctors would always be like, so I got all of my clients after I created the C-section birth course. They're like, we have a challenging. It was always like they had to give the rationale for why they were saying, could you reach out to her? Maybe you could suggest that she takes this course from you. I'm like, well, it was just like funny that even the doctors kind of had this play on it. Like, we're going to give you the clients with significant issues so you can help them work through it, and not just like the regular.
Oh, so when you're reaching out and saying, I can give C-section specific birth education.
Correct. But it was like they kind of were like, you know, let's give Bethany the challenging cases versus, oh, no, anyone could take your course, because it was just like a funny perspective. Now, this is, you know, 10 years ago, 8 years ago. So how things have probably shifted. And then also me telling them my story, I could feel like the shift as well.
Always changes people's minds.
And I love those doctors.
In 1 second.
I still do, you know, but yeah, you know, I just think across the board, we're finally, I think, giving good, knowledgeable information. We are starting to turn the leaf of getting to take that scarlet C away.
That scarlet C.
That's her scarlet C.
I don't know. I'm trying to think of a story. Recently, we have a friend who's going in for her third C-section, and she was having a conversation with someone else, but I was in the mix. And she, you know, the other woman was asking our friend when her due date was, and she said, well, it doesn't really matter because I know when my planned C-section date is, and I'll tell you that. That's when I'm having my baby. And she was, oh, like, why are you having a C-section?
It's the first question.
And
why?
she said, well, it's my third C-section, and so I'm having another C-section. And she said, oh, but what if you go into labor? You know, you can still have a shot. You know, don't give up now. And our friend is just very no nonsense. And she's like, actually, I want to have a C-section and I have zero problem with this. And no part of me wants that. You know, it's just putting this on her. And the person wouldn't give up. They just kept saying, but you should try. You should. And she was like, let's not even get into that this is my third C-section, but I like to plan this. It doesn't matter. It's just none of your business. And watching that conversation take place, I was just amazed.
Did you say any comments, or did you stay silent? Did you think if you opened your mouth, you would just go down?
Yeah. I couldn't.
Like, better if you don't have anything,
say nothing. But I just couldn't believe it. I just, and obviously she doesn't know this person very well. So what if she had it's none of her business, right?
None of her business. But it is interesting that, like, I think that is a more common narrative that you get. I would defend it. I'd be like, well, I'm within MFM, and this is a decision that we're making together.
And she didn't defend it. She just said,
no,
I don't. That's not happening. This is what's happening. I'm not going to argue with you about this. I don't understand.
And this is why we're defending those who don't have that personality of feeling so strong in their decisions.
Not caring at all. Exactly. And that's how I was kind of, I didn't allow anyone to say anything to me because I think I presented already with such a...
No, you're like, I'm going to be an anesthesiologist.
Yeah. And,
don't mess with me.
Thinking about the breech thing, I never once questioned that if you have a breech baby, you have a C-section. And I've been thinking about that a little bit more too, because there is this chatter about, oh, well, actually they can be delivered vaginally. But it's like, no, I'm still so confident in that. And what's more important is that anything can change over time. I could be wrong, but with the information that I had at that time, which I still have at this time, but I'm not saying something might not happen in 20 years. that was 100% the choice that was going to be the safest for my baby, which is what mattered to me the most. And first of all, I didn't know exactly how it felt to be a patient having a C-section. Right. But I just was so confident in like, this is what needs to be done and it's going to be done. And how could anyone look at that in a negative light or feel sorry for me or say that I was somehow less than because my baby was butt first. I mean, it just didn't occur to me as like a negative thing. And later on, when I had some friends, after me have breech babies, which I have a lot of them, they would act like it was some, I don't know, just more of a medical problem than I ever thought of it to be. Like, oh, do I have to worry about? They just were more worried than I was, where I just saw so many women come in with breech babies having C-sections all the time. It was a medical. The babies were fine. Yeah. Like, a lot of people have breech babies. I never, is it associated with this or that problem? It just never crossed my mind. And
you weren't thinking like, who are we blaming?
Yeah.
Your uterus?
Who are we blaming? Or is there something wrong with the baby that the baby decided to settle this way? I never, ever felt that way. And I'm kind of glad. But it's interesting now, just the more people you talk to and the more people ask you questions, how you just look at it in a
different way. And actually, it's so funny because yesterday we were at a party and this woman was like, I don't know, she's like, what do you do? Blah, 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 blah. And she had her 6-month-old. And I was like, oh, I have a podcast about a C-section, blah, blah. And she's like, oh my God, my mom had 4 C-sections. Oh. And she said it with like such confidence. I was like, did you? She's like, no, I birthed vaginally. But like the way she just said it, she was like proud of her mom for bringing her and her siblings into this world in that way. And she's like, I'm going to tell her to listen to it. Aww. Because I bet, like thinking about it, she's probably like, I don't know, let's say her in her 30s. Can you imagine 30 years ago having a C-section, the lack of support? I mean, the lack of products. Let's just go down the whole list.
Yeah. My mom actually had a C-section too.
I know. You're a C-section baby.
I am a C-section baby. And I remember when I was having a C-section, people would say, did your mom? And I was like, what does that matter?
Right.
Because I'm a totally different body shape than my mother.
Completely.
I knew that if there was any genetic variation, I didn't have that. We are just completely different humans.
She's 5'2",
you're
5'8".
And I'm just very specifically the same body type as my dad. My son has the same body type as my dad too. Like, I knew I wasn't. And her situation was, who knows? Like, I feel like she actually doesn't fully understand it, but it was some kind of, her water broke and she wasn't fully dilated enough. And then they just told her, like, she doesn't even seem to fully understand it, but it wasn't a breech baby situation. Right. So therefore I can't really compare those things. And so I didn't understand why people would even bring that up to me. But anyway, why do we think this stigma exists?
You go, Jen.
There's a lot of reasons. I almost don't know where to start. I think the biggest elephant in the room is the amount of unnecessary, and I'm going to steal this phrase from Kaylee Summers, medically coerced C-section. So that is a thing, first of all. It's definitely a thing. It's horrible.
And we acknowledge that. Yeah.
So because of those, like, until we can reduce those, I mean, ideally we would reduce those to 0, then those are what we think about when we think about C-sections.
Right.
We think about the times when this is a really negative thing that the healthcare system is putting on women and forcing them to undergo a surgery that they didn't really need. The presence of those types of C-sections, of course, is going to muddy the waters of, I think, all C-section births.
Yes.
So that's number one. So we do need to work on reducing that. However, the reason why we don't focus on that too much, and we've kind of said we don't want to go into that particular topic, and that's another thing people ask us about all the time, how do we reduce unnecessary C-sections, is because we are speaking to C-section mothers.
Right.
And so I don't think it's very helpful to hear that we need to reduce the C-section rate when we're talking to C-section mothers.
They're living this experience.
Because,
or about to live the experience.
Either they know they're already having one or they already had one, and dwelling on, was it unnecessary? What could I have done? Should I be really angry at my providers?
Mm-hmm.
I just don't know that that is supporting you in the way that we want to. It's sort of a separate conversation for a different audience, I think. Yeah. It just doesn't make you feel better about anything. In fact, it's just going to make you feel like this is something to be avoided. This is something that everyone's on a crusade against reducing these C-section rates, talking about the C-section rates of providers. So, of course, you're going to think, what is so bad about C-sections that we are on this mission to reduce them? Like, there must be something super horrible about them. And we internalize that, no matter if this was a choice that we made for ourselves or if this was very clearly medically indicated. We have that feeling of thinking about these unnecessary ones that just clouds everything else and say, this must be a horrible thing. Otherwise, why would everyone be going crazy trying to reduce them? And so it's just not helpful, I think, for this audience. Do you agree?
Of course. What's helpful is to provide your experience and how you are processing it all valid. And if we can give supportive words, if we can help you be more knowledgeable going into your next birth, if we can reduce any type of traumatic feelings that occurred, and those could be for so many different reasons, like, that's the goal. Right. That's what women should, that's what we want to do as women for other women. We are your shoulder to cry on. We're not going to make you cry.
And the big thing is don't blame yourself.
Don't blame yourself.
Anything that leads you to blaming yourself is not the right thing to focus on.
It's not helpful.
And I do think VBACs are a part of our, well, number one, because I can talk about it. But I do think it's a part of our conversation because, again, speaking to C-section moms, once a C-section mom, always, even if you have VBACs afterwards. So I think that part of the conversation is important, and navigating that and deciding whether or not you want to have a VBAC. And there are places to go. Yeah, there are places to go for thinking about physiologic birth and labor and making all of those choices. And so go to those places because, number one, we're not the experts on that. But I think that's one thing. So we talked about the ideal birth, right? So this putting on a pedestal, this natural birth versus unnatural. So if we're not doing natural, we're doing unnatural, which is obviously negative.
Right,
Most
that also kind of gets negative.
Like, you're not a human being, you're not a woman, you're not a mother, because you've had this unnatural experience.
Yeah. I think why it gets, honestly, so much negative chatter too is because we don't support a woman properly after a C-section. So then it's the healing aspect that I feel like it's like, oh, it's so terrible. Well, it is hard, but what can we put into place to better support that woman? If it's a product, or if it's teaching the partner how to support your wife or your partner after she's just delivered by C-section versus expecting her. And even in a vaginal, you're not just like popping up and becoming like the person you were previous to delivering. So I don't know. I feel like it's kind of layered. There's like the whole negative pre, and then for me, I feel like it's a lot of negative post because we're not supporting the right way.
I think it's a snowball effect where
that's what I was looking for. Yeah.
So where we're not educating about it, we're not talking about it. So therefore, women are going in unprepared and without the resources that they need for recovery. Mm-hmm. And so now maybe the experience isn't as good as it could be. And it's sort of all connected to each other, where it starts with not talking about it, not including it in birth education.
Classes,
therefore, not having the systems in place to support people in their recovery.
Right.
And it just all becomes just wrapped up in one negative thing.
I was going to say, it's like once it's just like in your mind, it's like create your plan. And then it feels like, well, if I put this in my plan, I don't know. I feel like that in itself, it's just like, this wasn't part of the plan. Well, there's a lot of things in birth that aren't going to be a part of the plan of how things go. But yeah, not including it in the birth classes, to be honest, I think is the starting point. Also, so we just wrote an article. We had a couple of the things I was...
Bethany was a contributor to an
It was
article.
about the Lamaze method. And they didn't put that we have a C-section podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And it made me so angry because I was like, this is it.
They had to have Googled you
Exactly.
to find the name of the birth education class that you have been doing for years, to basically find any other way
of saying who I was and why they were using, why I was contributing to this article. And I'm like, well, really, the history of the Lamaze method is because a woman realized how supported she was in another country emotionally, and then came to birth in the States and didn't have that emotional support. Really, the root of the Lamaze method is recognizing we have to support women better through breathing techniques, through all these. It doesn't matter, but this is only for a vaginal birth.
Where the baby ultimately comes out.
Yeah. And so that in itself, I read the article and I was like, well,
I think we should say something.
Why did you do that?
I'm getting more angry as we speak.
Because I put more attention in my everyday life into our podcast and supporting C-section moms,
right?
And teaching coping techniques.
If anyone wants to feature us in any media, anything, please accurately say
C-section
who we
advocates.
Are,
yes,
which is a C-section advocates, and doesn't matter what we are speaking about, because we can speak about various ways of supporting women. And it's okay.
Yes.
It's because if people see the word C-section, that doesn't mean it's going to give them like C-section vibes or something like that. Now suddenly their birth is going to go a certain way.
No, and guess what? You can utilize a lot of the Lamaze methods in a C-section birth. And actually, even more so, it's so important to have those breathing exercises, to have knowledge, to have pre and post support.
Well, it's very patronizing that we as a society think that women can't possibly hear about all the various things that can happen,
right?
Because we can't handle it. We can't handle the full spectrum of knowledge when it comes to birth, which a C-section is part of really fully understanding the full spectrum of everything.
Something came to my mind when you were saying, why do we think that like the stigma is even there? It's like, think of images that you see that are surrounding birth. 80% of them are showing like a woman in a bathtub or, this like vaginal experience, which is why when we put our pictures up of our births, I'm like, guess what?
We had babies too.
We had babies too. And yes, there was a drape and there were other things, but that baby being placed on my cheek was just the way I've put babies next to their moms that were just delivered vaginally, I
have to, because we're kind of talking about how C-sections are perceived in the media, I found a really awesome opinion article published in BMJ recently. It was like 2024. And it was about how the sensationalized headlines from research articles that come out. So people are rightly so trying to research what effects actually does a C-section have on the mom, on the baby, but how the media actually takes these articles without actually understanding the scientific basics behind them. These are observational studies, there's bias in them, whatever. These are pretty much never going to be randomized controlled trials because we're not randomizing people to get a C-section or not. So it's extremely hard to study. But this is a quote that I just have to read. So, for example, a 2018 systematic review compared long-term outcomes after vaginal and C-section births, made explicitly clear in the article, they said, these are observational studies only, and they cannot establish causation, meaning we cannot say, right, this is like relate drinking coffee to, something that how much you dance at night or something. Like it's like not going to be factual, causative, but you can see that they correlate. And so these studies are important, but what happens is then the media takes them and uses them to basically, I'll tell you what they did. So the Daily Mail took that article and said the headline was, Cesareans increase the risk of child obesity by 50%. Infants are also more likely to suffer asthma, while mothers increase their chance of a miscarriage. So they just took this article and sort of picked out these correlations that they found where they just threw a bunch of things at the wall and tried to see.
And then that creates fear.
That creates massive fear.
That is dangerous.
And it's dangerous. It's 100% dangerous.
And guess what? I was birthed vaginally and I have asthma.
Yeah, right. It's like,
it's like,
yeah. I was birthed by C-section. I don't have asthma.
Look, we already crossed one off.
We are not scientific either. So don't take either of us. But this is where this research, not to knock it, because obviously we need to be looking at things so that we can find things that are, but it's not changing. Who's going to have C-sections are not going to change based on this. All it is doing is placing all this negative information on C-sections and scaring people and saying, this is so bad. It's so bad. We have to avoid it. Other news outlets chose to emphasize, took the very same results and said that cesarean births were being marketed inappropriately to women concerned about their pelvic floor. So they all just took this article and ran with it in these various ways, but they were all negative. The positive one, which I guess I'm assuming I didn't read it, but was about the pelvic floor being better. They said, oh, it's being marketed to these women. It's what's the word? This is misogyny, where it's saying that women are making these uneducated, like uninformed decisions. It's knocking, honestly, physicians and everything that we try to do. Nobody is out there writing positive articles.
But, and that's why this is where your book comes into play, Jen. But how many people do we, now that they know what we do, they're like, oh my gosh, I have 2 neighbors who just had babies recently, and their first C-section was, she said it had to be an emergency. She's like already defending it. And the second one who just most recently delivered, I saw her on a walk and she's like, it was so nice to have this control. I felt so much better. She was happy talking about her second C-section. And I think that's where those are the stories that I wish would be out there more and highlighted more, how it changed her recovery mentally and physically going in for her second C-section in a different way.
And how about the great news, which is that we are making these birth experiences better.
Yes.
Not you and I slightly, but also we're talking about how hospitals are taking this totally new approach with incorporating like the early skin to skin and making it feel more like a birth experience. That's news. Yes. Good news is for women who have C-sections, we are, as a society, as a healthcare system, making it better for these women. That's news to me.
Yeah. But those aren't being.
But no one's going to write that. And
so that's what we're going to talk about it.
And they really should.
But it really just irked me. So I was so excited when I was like, oh my gosh, they used my content for this article. I felt so shattered about the end. It's like, wait a second.
Can you write to them and say
I think I feel like I need to. Because I'm like, this was not how I went into this.
And you should ask them if it's because of their own bias and stigma against C-sections.
I'm going to have you write the email and I'll just send it from my account.
I'll have ChatGPT write it.
Okay, perfect.
Also, there's just 2 books I wanted to bring up.
Okay.
One is we are going to be talking to Rachel Summerstein soon. So we'll get into more detail on this, but it's fascinating. She talks about the actual history of cesarean birth, but essentially there is a deep history with, as far as doctors practicing cesarean technique on women who did not have any autonomy whatsoever. And that inherent, horrible, very hard to read history is probably ingrained in us, where we know this negative side to things. Or it was also, they were using this because these women had some severe deformity or some medical problem that they very much knew that they were not going to be able to give birth vaginally. And this was a way of trying to save them, usually trying to save the mother, not necessarily the baby. But when we were talking about my grandmother and how I do think this is, because I've become so much more crunchy now, or spiritual, but I do think that even if things weren't told to us, they're passed down to us throughout history.
For sure.
And what our grandmothers and great-grandmothers knew of learning about these types of births, who they were happening to, probably with, definitely without consent in the when it comes to slavery, but even in the beginning where they would do it, more low-income people with less of a voice were sort of the first ones.
It's really interesting to think about it in that way and how it had that negativity. We need to dilute that
sort
negativity.
of passed down. Yes. Because that was before.
But not forget it.
But that was when it wasn't safe too.
Right.
So it didn't used to be safe at all. Very not safe for mom or for baby. And once we developed antibiotics and surgical techniques and all of the things now, it's extremely safe. But we still have that perspective of where it was very unsafe. And so the patients that were experiencing this these were very high risk scenarios, or they were in society, the people who didn't have a lot of choice. Of course, all of that brings up so many negative emotions and feelings for people.
Yeah.
That's something that's, I don't know, just kind of interesting to think about. And
that's why the evolution always is just keep moving forward. You know, we have to learn from these experiences to keep getting better and better and better.
Yeah. And then overall, I just started reading Jessica Zucker's new book called Normalize It.
I have too.
And it's overall about the stigma and shame that women face about so many
things.
Women's issues, basically.
Right. Miscarriages.
Whether it be, so her first book was about miscarriage, and it's just amazing. You think about it, how could there be a stigma around that? But obviously people feel uncomfortable sharing. They have all these feelings internally about, did I do something wrong? Did my body fail me?
Can I just interrupt you for a second? So I just did my second half marathon and Jen came and cheered us on, which was so sweet. But when you look at the history of marathons, the Boston Marathon was the first marathon that a woman was allowed to run in. And the reason they didn't want women running in the marathons because they thought it would somehow make her infertile or raise her to, and I'm like, wait, that's why they weren't allowing women, it's like that. And that was in the 70s.
I know.
It was the 60s. That's not that long ago.
We have a terrible history of how we've treated women.
Right.
And part of it is fighting that, which is why the people who do openly speak out, it's us moving forward as a society. And C-sections, I think, go along with that too, of a difference, basically. Feeling uncomfortable with sharing any divergence from what is seen as the ideal or the normal. And the reality is that C-sections are common, miscarriages are common. A lot of the things that we deal with as women, many of us experience. There's so many universal experiences that we grow to understand, especially as we get older and more people experience them. All these things happen that are sort of unique to being a woman. We realize that so many of them are sort of clouded by this shame. And the more we talk about these things and the more we're out in the open, anyone who feels like they want to shout things from the rooftop, good for you.
Yeah.
Who doesn't feel good when you hear someone shout out something that you would be scared
to say
yourself?
Yes.
Yeah. I had a C-section.
Yeah. I had 3 C-sections.
It's okay. Yeah. And the more we hear people talking about it, and the more we just say, like, we need to be better about this, you and I, very clearly that we need to be supporting C-section women too. They deserve everything that any other woman giving birth deserves. It's not okay that it's not talked about as much as other things. It's contributing to the people who have an unplanned C-section feeling so horrible about it because all that they heard was how to avoid it. And I did all the classes and I looked at all this person's Instagram a million times and I looked at their TikTok and still, what did I do wrong? And
taking that off the
table. It off the plate. I mean, I'm not saying don't do everything you want to do to prepare, but take the blame away. There are too many things that we cannot control in this world. Far too many. And obviously, there's the other coin of the people who choose a C-section.
And I think what we're recognizing so much more now, too, is emotionally supporting a woman is vital in how she comes out of this overwhelming experience of birth in itself and how it changes you and how you feel like the bonding issue, like there's all these things, the breastfeeding issues, the this, the that, like there are so many things that are already going to knock us down.
Yeah.
So like, let's not start already like on the ground.
There's other guilt. There's more guilt coming your way. So let's just try to eliminate one aspect. Yeah. There's the feeding guilt. There's all the mom guilt. But having C-section guilt too, like
there's so many emotions. Yeah.
Like even when we were talking about to Dr. Allison about the little trend that was on social media about C-section babies having sensory processing issues.
Oh, yes.
And there's just all these things that none of them are really proven, And they're all so multifactorial. There are so many things with your gut and your microbiome and your allergies. There are so many things that are affected by 1 million things that are going to come your way and your baby's way and your environment and everything you eat and do. And it's just,
there's not
one
singular
it is
thing.
not, the C-section is not going to put you off in either direction for whatever of these various issues. It's just, I don't think it's worth putting all the energy on the mode of delivery. It's just not helpful. It's not helpful to anyone. And
let's be proactive. Well, that's what Michelle being like, so our friend who's about to deliver in 2 weeks, this is how
just like, I'm not arguing with you.
Right. And it was almost like that woman asking her these questions, like wanting to break her down in a way.
It's like, what's next? You're going to call me a bad mom? Like,
right.
what else
Like,
do you
how
have to
about
say?
just saying, like, congratulations, you get to meet your baby in 2 weeks. That's so exciting. Focusing on that aspect of it.
Right. Well, I have one more thing, actually. So it's a sort of related, but in my research, as I do even for these.
Give us the stat.
Even for these ones where we're just chit-chatting. I just thought it was interesting. It's on elective C-sections.
Okay.
But it's part of the conversation people bring up when talking about unnecessary C-sections and how to prevent them. There was an article that came out in 2023 where they polled OBGYNs to see how many OBGYNs, I wonder if you know this, because I think it's so interesting.
Tell me.
So they asked them if it was your first baby, totally healthy, basically uncomplicated, no issues, not breech, how many of you would choose an elective C-section for yourself?
Oh, gosh. Oh, my God. I cannot wait to hear this. I'm going to say, let me go?
Yeah.
I'm going to say 65 to 70%.
What?
Would have wanted.
No.
No.
No, that's too high. I still think it's
40?
high. No, it was 14.
What?
But you don't think that's a lot?
14 would want?
Yeah.
Well, I guess I'm kind of thinking about their life too. Like if they're a practicing doctor.
Okay, so 14 would want. So they have no indications. This is purely like 100%. No history of trauma. Like no.
Right.
Just purely like I am fine and 14% will want them. Guess how many get
I don't think
an
I
elective
should guess
C-section?
again. I'm not doing
Yeah,
well
that
at
was
this
not a good
game.
guess.
Sorry.
Okay, do you think your OBs had elective C-sections? Do you have an idea?
I know she did.
Oh.
Yeah.
Elective.
Oh, well, I don't know if it was, I never asked her that specifically.
Okay.
But I know she had C-sections.
So, because this is a small percentage of, when we're talking about overall C-sections, truly elective C-sections, it's a very small percentage of overall C-sections, like very,
Under
very
5%.
small. So, oh yeah.
Yeah.
Very small.
Yeah.
So we're taking this very small amount and a lot of them are OBGYNs.
That is interesting.
So according to this study, a quarter of OBGYNs who've had babies. So before it was just asking like anyone.
Okay.
I guess they were asking women, but whether or not they were out of their childbearing years or whatever,
Okay.
had elective C-sections, a quarter.
Interesting.
So 1 out of 4. I think that's a lot.
That is a lot.
I think that's a lot. And the study thought it was a lot too.
Obviously.
Maybe not in your mind. But just, I mean, it's a little unusual for people to, we talk about it and we say that it's 100% okay, and it is, but it's a little unusual to entirely elect a C-section. So this is a high percentage of people. And it's spun in, I've heard people talk about it on podcasts. It's spun as this is the reason why we have unnecessary C-sections, because OBs want them for themselves. And so they are so pro C-section that they are maybe pushing this narrative onto other people.
Okay.
I don't see it that way.
I don't see it that way either. No.
I really don't. I think, why don't we look at the perspective that these people have that people who are not OBGYNs do not have? Perhaps it's that perspective and all of the things that they have seen and all the things that they know that can happen that is making them way, way more likely. So let's think about this another way so you'll get an idea. So if we take a random population of women, let's say, I'm making this up, 1% will choose an elective C-section. It's probably less than that. And then if we take that same group, but they're all OBGYNs, 25% of them will. Like that's way higher than the general population.
Yeah.
Way higher. I think it could be twofold. One, it could be just knowing what they know and it feels safer to them because they've seen all of the
I think that's maybe why I said the higher percentage.
Yeah. Yeah. But also, I think I said before, without a history of trauma, but I think that all OB-GYNs have a history of trauma because of all the traumatic things that they have seen.
Oh, yeah.
So they are inherently, whether it was their own personal experience or not, they have experienced trauma. And so that could be one of the reasons. And I don't think that they are putting their trauma onto other people. I don't think so. But I just thought that was an interesting statistic.
Very interesting. I'm sorry I threw your game off.
No, it's okay.
You're like, what?
It's okay. You get it. You get it better than anyone why someone would choose an elective. And so many people don't. And so I'm so glad that you have a voice in this space, because I don't think that we'll find so many people that will say it, so clearly. And that for the people that need to hear it, I think that's amazing.
Yeah.
Obviously, I wouldn't. Yeah. But that doesn't mean I don't get your perspective.
Right. Of course. So we don't always have to live everything. And I think that's what makes me angry sometimes when you look at Instagram. It's like, you have to look at a whole person. And when you're just shouting out things and judging without knowing the history of someone, like, it's really unfair. And I think, like we've said before, as we get older, we realize so much more. And as we are teaching our children to be kinder, have empathy, don't project your feelings onto others, allow others to share their feelings and create a safe space for them is so important.
And that's why it's so important to talk to people who have different perspective and different ideas about things. Yeah. Because that's how we learn to be
the stories matter.
Yeah. I would say overall, I came from a perspective of seeing birth solely as a medical event to where I am now, which is I would not choose a C-section for myself. That does not mean I am obviously against C-sections. Right. I wouldn't choose it for myself. And I see the value of bringing in all of these holistic, spiritual, whatever it is, aspects into C-section births whenever possible. And you came from a standpoint of seeing the beauty of the natural birth and appreciating that so much and supporting women through that, to having an experience where for you, that was no longer an option.
No.
That was absolutely not an option. And you, I think, even since we've started this podcast, have come to embrace.
I have, which was going to be my wrap up for you, because I wanted to challenge every listener that the next time somebody asks you how you delivered your baby, that you proudly say, I had a C-section, and then you don't say anything else. You don't defend it. You don't feel like you owe them an explanation, and then you show them your beautiful baby, because that was the end goal, right? Was that baby coming into this world. And I've started doing it myself too. Yeah. I just say it. I don't have to say oh, well, I was with an MFM. I like it.
Yeah.
The narrative doesn't need to be there. It's just, no, I had 3 C-sections.
Yeah, we're all worthy.
These are my humans.
We all did amazing things to get to where we are.
Yes.
I'm sure we'll have more to say on this topic in the future, but if anyone has any thoughts on C-section stigma,
please share it with us.
We'd love to hear them.
Yeah.
Please email us, hi@csxpodcast.com. Tell us if you've experienced any C-section stigma and how you think we can really work towards reducing all of this shame. So, Bethany, do you have anything else to wrap up?
I don't, except for that's why the C-section guide. Download that. That is your golden tool to helping yourself be more prepared in any way you're going to deliver.
Absolutely. Well, we'll see you all next week.
Bye.
Bye.
We had so much fun recording this episode, and we hope you enjoyed it. Please reach out to us and let us know what you think and what you would like to hear about in future episodes. We would love to hear from you. You can email us at thecsxpodcast@gmail.com or follow us on Instagram at thecsxpodcast. We'll be back with more next week. Bye.